when you assemble the sunroof crank, okay, so you have this fella down underneath here, which you've probably seen, which goes underneath. Okay, and then the crank goes onto that. This thing has this gear on the other end. Okay, it slides up in here. The plastic thing is what the screws go into. And if you look at that gear, if you turn the crank, let's see, counterclockwise, it will eventually go to the point where it stops. So before you assemble this, you need to take your crank and turn it clockwise, I don't know, 30 or 40 turns. Okay, so that the cables will go back all the way. So what will happen is, if you don't do this the way that I'm explaining, and you just put this thing in here and crank it backwards, and that is not 20 or 30 turns ahead, when you go to turn it back, your cables are it's gonna feel like your cables are binding up. Your roof may not only go back to about right here. You'll be like, hey, how come it doesn't go all the way back? So take this back out, turn it 20 or 30 turns clockwise, and then what it does is it will enable it to go, back and forth all the way from the front all the way to the back, and then back and forth. And check it before you put your roof back in. Okay, so the next parts are these things. I just bought new ones. It is really important that these things are there. You see these little guys here, and see how they get jacked up already, brand new. When you put these into the hole, you want to use only these little tiny screws. If you put long screws into them, it'll open these things up too far, which this one's kind of jacked up, even though it's brand new. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, so that these things go into the hole here so that they hold it in place. These ones aren't not as important as the one in the middle, but they still are important. The reason they are is because they'll hold the cables in place so that they don't move back and forth. Because if there's too much play in here, where these things go in, where these things actually slide into this part here, they're two separate pieces, but they actually slide into it in a little groove that goes in there. If this is not, has a little bit of looseness, then what will happen is your cables, your roof will be uneven this way, and then it will bind up. So all this stuff has to be perfect, or you're going to have problems with your sunroof. So these pieces go on each side, right and the left. These little things should be there. If they're not there, the other thing you can do, as well as these little guys here, is you can buy some plastic inserts. They have plastic inserts you can buy, and you have to modify them and grind them down, and then you'll have to take this portion and then grind it down so that there's room for this to be down as flush as possible, because if it sticks up too much, then you'll have other problems. Because Volkswagen doesn't give you really any room for error. Their cars are very, very tight tolerance, and when people think Volkswagens are easy, they're actually twice as hard as any other car, in my opinion, because they're so specific. Anyway, so that's how your roof goes on. To get this portion on, there's two ways you can do it as far as I know. One way is you can put on your roof, your sunroof, slide it all the way back, put this portion in after, and then slide it back forward by rotating your thing after everything's assembled, and then put this panel on. And then there's these things, from what I understand, they have to be turned this direction, and then after they're in, you have to turn them back this way. And I think what they do is they kind of lock the sliders, the cables actually, into position so that they won't come out just from wiggling around and stuff, going back and forth, which would be a disaster if they did, because you get your sunroof stuck back there and it'd be a real pain to get it back up forward. So that's kind of how it works, and that gives you, I looked online, I didn't see any videos on this, so I thought it took me a week to figure out some of these things. Yeah, it's just not worth it to spend a whole week doing that. So I figured, well, I'll just share this. Good luck with your sunroof.